Get started then. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I've been super excited for this talk all week. My name is Jason, and I'll be the moderator today. And we are pleased to introduce Alysa Raleigh. She's a fish and wildlife health biologist with Indiana Department of Natural Resources. Alysa works as the Aquatic, Reptile, and Amphibian Health Specialist on the Fish and Wildlife Health Response Team, where she helps monitor, investigate, and respond to wildlife health concerns across Indiana. She earned her bachelor's degree from Franklin College and later completed her master's degree at Purdue University. Alysa's work focuses on the health of fish and herpetofauna, including investigative responses to fish kills and natural die-offs. In addition to disease surveillance and response, Alysa participates in issues related to species introductions and conservation, such as crawfish, frogs, and amphibian health efforts, and plays a key role in wildlife health outreach and coordination throughout Indiana. We are very pleased to have her join us today, and I'm going to let her start sharing her screen and take away. So thank you, Alysa, for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for having me tonight. I'm very happy to talk to you guys about our Fish and Wildlife Health Program. So my name's Alysa Raleigh. I am a health biologist with the Division of Fish, Wildlife, and Nature Preserves. I'm part of our health program, and our health program uses a One Health approach when we are investigating fish and wildlife health issues across the state. And so we want to recognize the fact that there is an interconnection between the health of wildlife, humans, domestic animals, and the ecosystems that they share. So that's a big part of our program, and we really try to focus on that. We do a lot of cooperation and collaboration with a lot of different entities around the state. So we work with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. We work with our Board of Animal Health, the Department of Health, and a lot of other agencies and local entities as well. So we work with veterinarians, doctors if they have questions for us, and then just regular people that have questions about fish and wildlife health. So our program was really established, I want to say in 2019, so a couple years before I came on, and it's grown since then. So when I first came on, it was just two health biologists, me and a gal named Michelle. And so Michelle has since been elevated to our supervisor, and then I've kind of stayed as a health biologist. So since then, our team has grown. We're kind of split into two right now. We have a response team and then a research team. So our response team is divided by specialty. So we have an aquatic health specialist, an avian health specialist, and then a mammal health specialist. And I believe those other folks will be giving presentations. So I'm not going to give too much information about their jobs because I'm going to let them do that. But we cover the whole state in our specialties. So if there's something aquatic that's 3 hours away from me, that's in my realm, and I would cover that. Again, we do interface with other agencies, so that could be IDEM or BOA or IDOH, and so we really want to kind of take that whole collaboration thing and integrate that into our response. Because sometimes things happen and there could be a zoonotic thing potential, and we need to coordinate that with those organizations so that we're getting the word out to prevent people from getting sick or other things from happening. One of our biggest things that we do is we monitor reports of sick or dead wildlife across the state, and we also do disease surveillance. The disease surveillance really is important when we're talking about avian influenza, chronic wasting disease, and epizootic hemorrhagic disease. So those are the big ones that we do surveillance in. And other things if they happen to pop up. A couple years ago, we did have rabies pop up on the landscape, and so that one kind of just got thrown in there, and it was a big one. So then we also have our research team. We have a one health biologist, and I actually just stepped into this role very recently. So still kind of learning what that's going to entail, but we're going to be focusing on the Grand Calumet region, area of concern in Indiana. And so we're going to be looking at how the environment affects fish and wildlife health in that area. But I'm not going to be talking about that one today. I'm going to be focusing on the aquatic health specialist role. We also have a waterfowl health biologist. So she's going to also be giving you guys a talk. So I will let her talk about that when she is presenting. Okay. So as the aquatic health specialist, one of the big jobs that I had was monitoring reports of aquatic or herpetofauna sick or dead issues. So that image there that I have on my PowerPoint, those are reports that came in all last year and a couple years before that. So as you can see, that covers the whole state. And we have an online reporting tool found at that website there. And that's for anybody in the public or even other biologists around the states or veterinarians. Anybody can use that report and report to us sick or dead wildlife. And so typically what we're looking for is signs that, multiple animals are affected. Species of special concern go right at the top of the list. We investigate those and we kind of try to figure out, well, what's going on? So we get these reports daily. As soon as somebody reports something to us, it comes to us in an email and we get that right then and there. So it allows us to respond quickly to those reports that come in, and it's a very handy tool. We do get a variety of reports, which is why we have our specialties, because it would be a lot for one person to handle every single thing that came in. So for my reports, I would get a lot of domestic animal reports. So with those, we don't really cover domestic animals, but we would give guidance on where somebody could go to get information, such as their local vet or a BOA veterinarian they could get information from. We can provide education on where, like resources online that they could find information about that. I've also gotten just random reports of like dead animals on properties. So again, it's an educational thing at that point that we provide them guidance and resources for that. Um, I also get reports of privately owned ponds or property. So privately managed water is not under DNR purview, but a lot of the issues that happen on those privately owned lands happen on public. And so again, it's another time that we can provide education to people about their property or their pond that may happen, every year, every 5 years or 10 years, or they've never seen it happen at all, but I know what happened there, so I can provide guidance for them. And usually at the end of those types of things, those people are very grateful to have those educational tools and the guidance on the things that they can do. So this tool is super great for us to reach all corners of the state because I'm based out of Indianapolis and I can't always just go up to the northwest part of the state like Gary. That's 3 hours away from me. So if I can have a report from someone from the public, then I am able to just be there, but not be there physically. Okay. So I'm just going to go through and give some examples of various reports that I've received throughout the years, kind of just to show the variety that I've gotten. So this one here, this was an example of dead frogs, and the first example that I've had that looked like this. So when I got this report in, the person wrote, I found about 15 to 20 dead bullfrogs on the bank of a small pond. Most of them had their guts out. So I was like, oh, that's really alarming. You see that many frogs and their guts are hanging out. I would probably freak out too, because the tenor of the report was that this person was very alarmed. So when you do some investigation on something like this, you kind of take in all of the aspects of it and try to figure out, what's going on here. So I looked on the map at this specific area because our report, you can actually put a pin where it is that you saw whatever it was that you saw. So I could look at it, and then I looked on Google Maps to see, what did the landscape look like, and then I ended up calling the person and say, "Hey, what did you see?" So come to find out that the water level on this pond had dropped quite a bit in the time that maybe it was up and then it came down, then it froze. And so there was a lot of things going on. And so the area that these frogs were in, you can see there's some vegetation there, but they were kind of trying to go up towards vegetation. And the weather that was leading up to this happening, it was a warm spell and then it got cold and then it got warm and then it got cold again. So I took all that information and I talked to our herpetologist and I said, "Have you guys ever seen this before? Because this is kind of strange." And I thought that maybe it was just that the frogs got stunned. They were out in the environment, in the elements, and they got stunned and couldn't move. And then they were exposed to predators, which is why maybe their guts were hanging out because the predators were trying to eat them. So that was my guess. And the herpetologist agreed with me. Maybe they were trying to find shelter in all that vegetation and they just couldn't because they were stunned. So we thought this was a natural die off, a natural event, and not really much to do for this except kind of let the frogs break down in the environment. They will get scavenged or they'll just kind of return to the environment. So once we decided on that, I called the person back and let them know that we think this is natural and that we don't think there's really anything to do at this point. And they were very happy with that response and very grateful that we reached back out to them. So when we get these reports, a lot of people are very concerned about pollution events because we're dealing with water. Indiana is a very heavy agriculture state, and we have areas with industry as well. So people are very concerned about water and what is the neighbor doing that could impact their water. So that what I think is what this person was very concerned about when they submitted this report. So they were happy to learn, oh, this is probably just a natural thing that just happened to happen. Okay. So this one was an interesting case. This happened last week, actually. Um, it was an illegally taken terrapin. So I received a call from a young girl saying she had an emergency, but she didn't give me any details, and she didn't even leave her phone number for me. So luckily, our phone calls, they have caller ID. So I was able to get in touch with this girl and try to figure out, do you have a wildlife emergency? And what's going on? And I'm texting this girl because she's in class and she could not take a phone call. And so I'm getting details from her. And she told us that her friend from high school, this is a high school teenager, had gone on vacation to North Carolina and last year, and that this friend had taken a juvenile diamondback terrapin from North Carolina while on vacation last year and has this terrapin as a pet, and that the terrapin is no longer doing very good in this young girl's care. So the reporter was very concerned about this terrapin and found out that this species of terrapin is actually a species of special concern in North Carolina. So I was like, oh boy, that's an interesting one. And I've never had that happen. So I had to talk to our license or permits manager to find out, where do we go with this? Because obviously this species is not native to Indiana. So it kind of limits us on what we can do. And so we had to reach out to North Carolina to figure out what they wanted to do. You know, do they want us to confiscate this turtle? Do they want us to euthanize this turtle? Do they want to fine the girl for illegally taking this terrapin from the environment? So, and again, we're dealing with a teenager, someone who's 14 or 15 years old. So there were a lot of questions that we had to figure out, and we had to figure out where this girl was because we didn't know where she lived or anything like that. So me and the conservation officer were kind of working back and forth on this, getting information from the reporter and then from North Carolina on what could we do for this terrapin, and provide education, maybe a stern talking to this young person that took a terrapin from the wild that should have just been left alone. So in the end, our Indiana conservation officer was able to find the girl that took the terrapin. He did confiscate it from her and put the terrapin into the care of a rehabber. So at this point, I'm not sure if the terrapin can maybe return to a rehabber that is in North Carolina, but it did not have to be euthanized like we initially thought, which was a win for us in the end of it. So that all happened last week. So it's always something. And then we had this one. This has been a work in progress for a couple years, actually. So through our reporting system, we got a report of sick crappie at Silver Lake. This is a very popular fishing spot, fishing lake in Kosciuszko County in Indiana. It's kind of in our northeast part of the state. An angler submitted a report in September of 2024 of sick crappie. And as you can see there, the crappie had these red lesions all over their bodies. And this was just the most funny looking picture, but he had submitted several pictures of different crappie with lesions. So the lesions were kind of all over these crappie at different sizes, but they were all very red and inflamed and unhappy looking. And so after talking to this guy, we kind of found out that the crappie fishing in this lake seemed to not be as good as it normally is. And a majority of the fish that they were catching had these red sores. And so when you're recreating, we always tell people that you recreate at your own risk. Or if you're fishing and you want to catch fish to eat, you don't want to eat diseased looking animals. So if you're catching fish and they all look like this, you should not eat them. So there's kind of, a human health aspect to this, and people like to go fishing in this lake. So we ended up working with our district fisheries biologist to collect some samples of crappie and send them to a lab for testing. We did that twice in 2025, so it was May and September, and we were working with a federal lab in the La Crosse Fish Health Center. And they have been really great with helping us figure out what was going on. So our first shipment, unfortunately, got delayed due to something happening on FedEx's end. We use FedEx to ship a lot of our stuff. They do overnight shipping, and generally they're pretty good. But for whatever reason, our first shipment, they didn't get it there on time. So we were unable to get all of the testing that we wanted to have done. So we were only able to get virology, and that didn't pull up anything. Nothing was isolated, didn't really give us any answers. So we went back in September, got a fresh batch, and these fish didn't seem to have as big a sores as the first batch that we sent, but they had like the start of sores. So we thought, this is good enough. We're going to send it to them. And then the government shutdown happened. So we had to wait for results, and we got them back in like late December, pretty close to the new year. And they were found to have a bacterial infection caused by a bacteria called Plesiomonas shigelloides. And La Crosse had never seen this bacteria before. They actually had to send it out to a different lab to figure out, what is this bacteria? So this is a work in progress, because if you don't cook fish that maybe have this bacteria inside of them, it can cause human disease. So we're working on providing, kind of FAQs about the bacteria, and to remind people to properly cook their fish before they consume it. And then also working with our Department of Health on passing out that information. So this one was not just about the crappie health, but also human health. And it was a very interesting case that is still a work in progress. Okay. So another aspect of my position as a health specialist was to respond to fish kills, reports of fish kills. So these are ones that are caused by spills of objectionable substances into waterways. These could be agricultural spills. Indiana is highly agricultural. So we get a lot of manure, fertilizer spills enter the waterways, and that can cause fish kills. We have industrial areas. So the northwest part of the state, highly industrial. Indianapolis is industrial, Fort Wayne, and then some other places in the northeast. A lot of industry in those areas. And so there's always a chance that something could spill and get into our waterways, cause a fish kill. Sewage and other wastewater, big problems. You have combined sewer overflows, or something happens and it kills a wastewater treatment plant. We had that happen and it, wiped out a stream. And then we do have pipelines that go through the state. And so one of the first fish kills that I had to respond to was a pipeline spill. So, accidents happen and then there's a response to that. So when a fish kill happens, oftentimes it is a coordination of multiple agencies. We are working with our Department of Environmental Management, or IDEM. I'm working with our conservation officers, and then any local health department or emergency response type of thing, we work with them to make sure that it's even safe for us to go out there. We can seek damages if we know that there's a responsible party, and we can recoup our conservation officer's time when we do an investigation. So some years we have a lot of spills that cause fish kills and we do get a lot of money back. And then other years we only have a couple. So it really just depends on the year. Okay. So when we are investigating fish kills, we have it written into our code, the Indiana code, that gives us the ability to pursue damages and recoup law enforcement costs. This is kind of unique to Indiana. Not all states have this written into their code that they are able to pursue damages. So somehow we got this into the code, which is actually pretty difficult to do, to change the code. And we have that ability to pursue damages. And even if they do, I want to say it was $5,000 worth of damages, we can even go for lost recreation value. So it just really depends on the kill. We also have it written into our Indiana Administrative Code. This is how we establish values for fish kills or for fish and wildlife. We use a text from the American Fisheries Society called the Investigation and Monetary Values of Fish and Freshwater Mollusk Kills. So this publication is a little bit old, and I believe it's currently going through a revision, which is super great because we've had a lot of inflation recently. So we use this. It provides guidance and methods for performing an investigation that if it were to go to court, it will hold up in court. So our conservation officers get trained in this. Every year we do a refresher. We go over those methods, and they do mock fish kill investigations on how to do that if they get called out into the field. So this is something that we do every year, and we take it very seriously because if we don't do it right, somebody could challenge us and we could lose out on those damages. So I'm going to go through a couple of fish kills that I've responded to since I've started with our health program. So the first one was that pipeline spill that I referenced. This was, I believe, in 2022 in Dyer Creek in Putnam County, Indiana. And so the area that the pipeline went through, there were residents that started smelling odors of a pipeline. And so they immediately called 911 because if you're smelling odors, that's a sign that, oh, something is happening that's not supposed to be happening. So the owner of the pipeline was able to determine, yes, we're losing, in this case, it was natural gasoline. So they could determine that there's a spill and they can actually pinpoint it because they have sensors on those pipelines and they can shut it down. So once they shut it down, it immediately initiated a spill response. So IDEM, local EMS, all of those people got activated to perform a response. And so it was actually not safe for us to go out and perform an investigation until they were able to kind of get this under control because of the odors in the air. It could kill people. They ended up excavating lots of soil and all that kind of stuff. They found that the pipeline spilled almost 25,000 gallons of natural gasoline. So they had to clean that whole area and dispose of it properly. And then they had to repair the pipeline. And then on our end, we had to do a fish kill count. And in this case, we did what we call a complete count, which is where we go through the whole affected area and count everything that we can find. So over 1,800 fish, 229 crayfish, 7 salamanders, 26 raccoons, 3 squirrels, a bird, and 10 other mammals. So like small mammals, mice, and stuff like that. So this actually nuked everything where it was. So all the raccoons, they just died where they were. But this pipeline, this company, they were on it. They took it very seriously. They even helped us count everything and provided us all the information that we asked for. You know, they take it very seriously when accidents happen. And we were able to get all of the restitution on this because it was a very thorough investigation and they understood that they were the responsible party, obviously. So these pipeline spills don't happen very often. They take those pipelines very seriously. They are under constant monitoring. But this just happened to be the very first fish kill that I ever responded to, a pipeline. And I smelled like natural gasoline for a good 2 days. Okay, so then there was we had a fertilizer spill in Shipshewana Lake, which is in Shipshewana, Indiana. So residents around the lake reported seeing dead fish in Shipshewana Lake, and so that kind of triggered response. This lake is interesting in that it does have several algal blooms throughout the year that can cause a fish kill. So it was kind of a question, is this an algal bloom? Is this a natural thing? Or is this actually a fertilizer spill? So our district fisheries biologist and a conservation officer and IDEM emergency response all went out to check this out, and they did determine that this was a fertilizer spill. So our IDEM emergency response person was able to find an outfall where the fertilizer was coming out, and they traced that back to the responsible party. So IDEM has all the maps with all the outfalls and all the pipes, and they know where everything comes from. So they were able to trace that back. We did get a responsible party, and we were able to do a complete count of this. So our fisheries biologists and the conservation officer counted every single fish and mussel that was affected from this fertilizer spill. And they counted them, they ID'd them, and they measured them. So this was a pretty big kill. The restitution on this was over $11,000 because of the mussels. Mussels have a very high value. And so they ended up killing, I think it was 85 mussels, and that added up really quick. Another thing that we respond to are natural fish die-off events. So these happen all throughout the year. They happen for a variety of reasons, and they tend to always impact a lot of fish in a short time frame. So when people see these happening, they think, oh my gosh, the water's polluted. But when in fact, it's just something natural that happens. And there's not really anything that we can do to avoid it. The best thing that we can do when people report these is to provide education. So these happen for a variety of reasons. Seasonal temperature changes. We could have extremely high temperatures in the summer, we get freezing temps in the winter, or when you have those temperature fluctuations, when it goes high, low, high, low, high, low, really quickly. Fish don't like that, and they will die at the drop of a hat. All of these fluctuations also will affect dissolved oxygen levels. And so that is a huge factor for the stress that fish can handle. If there's no DO, in the water, then fish can't breathe and then they die. And then we also have algal blooms. Last year, we had tons of algal blooms. It was a very wet spring for us last year, and it just triggered a lot of algal blooms and then therefore fish kills because of the fluctuating dissolved oxygen levels, but also the toxins that the algal blooms release. And then we also have disease on top of this. So generally what happens is 2 or 3 or all of these things happen at once, and then that's what happens to cause a massive fish kill. So like in this picture here, That is a species, mostly a species of fish called gizzard shad, and gizzard shad are highly sensitive to environmental changes. And so when the temps fluctuate or the shad just becomes stressed for any reason whatsoever, they will die, and they die quickly, and they die in large numbers. So we get reports of gizzard shad all the time. Okay. So I'm going to talk about Shipshewana Lake again. This was an algal bloom that happened in Shipshewana that same year that we had the fish kill from the fertilizer. So you can see from that picture there, the water is like pea soup. It was like green, bright green. There was dead fish dabbled through, and it was really gross looking, and fish were everywhere. So we got a report from someone that lived around the lake. There's dead fish at Shipshewana Lake, and they attached this picture to the report. So that very clearly shows that there's an algal bloom. And we didn't even really have to go out to determine because this lake has such frequent and almost to the day, like every year to the day, we know there's going to be an algal bloom at this lake. So it frequently gets those algal blooms, causes the die off multiple times a year. And we're like, well, that's Shipshewana Lake for you. So this one, we provide education for anybody that reports to us on this lake because not everybody knows about algal blooms and what it does to the lake. So that's just one of the ones that we deal with, and we expect that to happen. Another thing that has been happening, at least for the last 2 years now, is we are getting dead silver carp reports on the Wabash and Ohio rivers in Indiana. So this happened during the summertime. We got several reports all up and down both rivers. Luckily, one of our fisheries biologists was able to collect samples both years and send them to the lab. So fish are kind of finicky. When you want to do lab testing for fish, they need a fish that is freshly dead or on its way to dying. So if it's been dead for even a couple hours, they don't want the fish because it's just going to give them wacky results that are no good to you. So our fisheries biologist was able to collect fish that were in the process of dying and get them to the lab that same day. The lab was able to do some testing on this, and they isolated a bacteria called Streptococcus dysgalactiae. And so what we're finding is that this bacteria is kind of unique to silver carp. And when silver carp are heat stressed, they start getting this bacteria blowing up in their bodies and causing bacterial sepsis, and then they die. And what's happening is there are so many carp and then they die in such large numbers, it's highly visible to the public, and they become alarmed and again think, oh, there's something wrong with the water. And then we start getting a lot of reports. So again, another opportunity to educate the public on what's happening. This seems to be happening every year now. We have silver carp up and down both of those rivers, so I expect it to be something that we deal with annually. Okay. Another thing that we do is help with fish health surveillance. So we do have 7 state hatcheries across the state, and they grow fish for the purpose of stocking them in state waters. And before those fish can be stocked, they have to be health tested to make sure that they are disease free and we are not introducing diseases into our state waters. So we provide assistance with sample collection for the hatcheries. You know, we're just another set of hands that can help because some days you can get a lot of work that you've got to do, and just having extra people can help speed along that process. So one of our big programs that we do is muskie in Webster Lake, Indiana. They collect muskie to get the eggs and fertilize them, and then they're going to go to one of the hatcheries to be grown into little fingerlings, and then they go through the process. So we collect the bycatch from those nets and disease test them to make sure that the muskie are okay for us to do that, because we don't want to introduce disease anywhere. And then our other hatcheries, you know, they're growing salmon, trout, walleye, bluegill, catfish, all of those game species that people really love to fish for. And so we've got to make sure that those are healthy to go into state waters. And they get health tested, I believe, twice a year. So another thing that we are able to do is research projects or reintroduction projects. So I know there was a mussel health project that Purdue did, looking at how the environment around streams and in the streams affects mussel health. We also had an issue 2 years ago of turtles in the Calumet, Grand Calumet region, looking sick, kind of having puffy, gross looking eyes. It looked like ranavirus, but we weren't able to test to confirm. So we were all geared up to do that last year, and then we got no reports last year for us to be able to collect any samples. But should they pop up this year, we'll be ready to go. And then our big one that I'm going to talk about is our crawfish frog reintroduction project. So our health program and our herpetologist program, we wanted to reintroduce these frogs. They are a state endangered species, and they live in crayfish burrows in prairies, and they breed in spring ponds. So they have a very unique niche that they fulfill. And the thing with these is that they take 2 to 4 years to reach sexual maturity before they're going to start reproducing again. So the biggest threat to these guys in Indiana is that they are facing habitat loss and fragmentation, and they are susceptible to diseases. So one of the diseases, or there are 3 diseases that we were concerned about, which was chytrid, rhinovirus, and Purkinsia. And so we did some disease sampling to make sure that we were not moving diseases across the landscape. So this map here is just kind of show the range of the crawfish frog. And so you can see in Indiana, we don't have a lot of spots left. There are very few where you can find crawfish frogs in the wild. There's one fish and wildlife area that we know that they're at. You could go and see them if you could find them. And then a lot of the little populations are on private property. So it's really hard to find them. So that was part of it there. So we began planning for this in 2023. This was, our herpetologist's idea. He's been thinking about it for a really long time. And so we really started going for it in 2023. We did the disease sampling, as I talked about, from both of the sites. So our donor site was a fish and wildlife area, and then we were going to take them to our recipient site, the Angel Mounds State Historic Site. We did some disease testing with our Purdue Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory. And then we also worked with the National Wildlife Health Center. And so through both of those labs, we were able to get all of our disease testing done and kind of get a good idea. Luckily, Purkinsia, that was the one that we were really concerned about because it's only been detected in one location in Indiana. That came up negative. We're pretty sure that rhinovirus and chytrid kind of is ubiquitous across the landscape. And so a positive wasn't necessarily going to deter us from our project because we think it is across the state. It just kind of pops up. So in spring 2024, we moved 8 egg masses from the Fish and Wildlife area to Angel Mounds State Historic Site, and we monitored them all summer long. And we were able to find metamorph froglets around the 4th of July. So it was a very happy time for us. We were worried that, what if they're not going to come out? And then the pond was drying up, but it did what it's supposed to do. And we found the little metamorphs around the 4th of July. It was a really great day. So that was the first one that we found right there. And I was able to be the one to find the first metamorph. And it was a very happy day. So we figured if there's one, there's probably more. We're just not finding them. So 2025, we're still working on our project. We added another layer to this where we started head starting. This was a huge collaboration with Purdue University and one of their labs. They had all of the equipment in order for us to do this, to take egg masses and grow them in little mesocosms. So we continued moving egg masses to angel mounds because we wanted to keep that portion up. And then we were also moving egg masses for the head starting. At angel mounds, there was a historic flood event that flooded like the whole property. So we were uncertain how that was going to impact the tads that were growing in 2025 and the frogs that were there from 2024. So we're not sure if that had any negative impacts or how big they were on the work that we've been doing at Angel Mounds. We also found some new sites for release, and we continued to do disease surveillance at those new sites. Okay, so at the Purdue Wildlife Area, we had an experimental design for the tanks that we were using. We were trying to see, what densities can we grow these frogs at to be successful? What kinds of foods can we feed them to grow them into good froglets that will survive and be around at the release sites. So this is kind of an example of that. And all of this was randomized. And it was a very labor intensive project. Our previous One Health biologist was out there every single day for a month, catching froglets, measuring them, making sure that they didn't drown in the mesocosms. It was a lot of work. So this is just a picture of what those mesocosms look like. We had them all set up in lines, and then they had these little covers on them to keep things out of them. So at the end of this, we did end up releasing like thousands of tadpoles in one of the release sites because when we collected those egg masses, it just amounted to an extraordinary amount of tadpoles. So we had our experimental tadpoles and then we had extra ones. So all those extra ones went to the new site and then we ended up releasing 900 froglets that year. So some of them went to the new site and then some of them went to Angel Mounds to kind of supplement the tadpoles that may have been affected by the flooding event. So for 2026, we are still planning to translocate egg masses. We are scaling back the head starting. So before in last year, all that head starting effort was at the Purdue Wildlife Area, and we just currently don't have anybody stationed up there to be able to continue that project. So we're kind of scaling that back and moving it to our Bloomington field office where our herpetologist and our assistant herpetologist can do that and monitor it every day. So we're going to continue our work at Angel Mounds. This year is the first year that we could potentially have breeding frogs. So our herpetologist is going to set up a camera out there to record calls, and maybe we're going to get some frogs on the cameras. He said it's a little early, but it's within the realm of possibility. So we're really hoping that we get those calls on there. Okay, so that's kind of the end of everything that I've got. Do you guys have questions? And I've also put on my contact information if you guys ever want to reach out.
Wow. Incredible, Alysa. I love it. I'm gonna, yeah, like you said, let's open up for questions. Feel free to type them into the chat if you're too shy to unmute. I can go ahead and ask the first
Yep.
because Purkinje is kind of like one of those hobby diseases for me. I don't know if you have like some of those for yourself, but when I was doing a project on it, I was really interested in how do you mitigate against it? Like, is there environmental health actions you
I
can take?
don't know that there's anything that you can do. From what I understand about it, it's pretty hardy in the environment. And so the area that it's at is Big Oaks National Wildlife Refuge. And so they've got a breeding population of crawfish frogs. And there was one year where the tadpoles there they kept having massive die-off mortality events, and it came back to be Purkinje, and that was the first detection that we've had of it, and we haven't had it anywhere since. So our herpetologist and me too, we are just like, well, we just won't go to that area because we're nervous about even getting it on our shoes or something like that, and then trekking it to other places that we go. So I think as long as you're practicing disinfection and all of that stuff when you're entering and exiting new places. That's one way to kind of keep it at bay. But I haven't read up on it recently, but I know it's pretty hardy.
Thank you. Thank you. That's what I've read as well. So,
Yeah.
anyone in the call want to ask a question?
I had a question about the coronavirus chytrid stuff.
Hmm.
So you said that when you have positive results for that, you kind of like you think that it's more like ubiquitous
Hmm.
throughout the environment.
Hmm.
Um, I guess my background or my question would sort of be like, why do you think that? I feel like usually when I read like coronavirus, it's like not good, especially
Yeah.
for like for turtles, for the animals like
Hmm.
sharing the aquatic environment. So I guess kind of like what are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that? Like, yeah.
Yeah, so we know that these diseases, these pathogens just kind of hang out in the environment.
Mhm.
And so we didn't want that to be a deterrent for us starting the reintroduction project. We knew that our donor site, Hillenbrand Fish and Wildlife Area, had already tested positive for chytrid. And
Mhm.
then for ranavirus, when those outbreaks happen, they're very quick and very hard to detect. So
Mhm.
we weren't even sure if we were going to like catch a mortality event. We talked to the folks at the National Wildlife Health Center, and that's what they told us that if we were able, like, they would be shocked if we caught a mortality event to be able to collect samples and send it to them for
Mhm.
confirmation that that was what was happening because it's just so fast. So, you know, if we could hardly catch it in the wild, we weren't very concerned about transmitting that across the landscape. I think we were more concerned about the chytrid. So with that, we knew that it was positive at the Fish and Wildlife area. So we really honed in on angel mounds to see can they detect it as angel mounds, and they did. There wasn't any outbreak. We just submitted tadpoles and they swabbed them and they were able to pick it up. None of those tadpoles had any signs of infection. They weren't exhibiting that redness or anything. So um, they weren't seemingly being affected by it. There was no massive outbreak of it or like mortality event. So we just didn't want that to kind of hold us back from doing the project. We were leery about Perkinsia, as you know, as we discussed, it being kind of a hardy or disease and not really having any information on it. But we felt knowledgeable enough about ranavirus and chytrid that we were okay with going forward with that. And
Cool.
that went through all of our level like chains of commands, like that went to the top, and they were like, okay, you can do this.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely for us. For when I was doing like turtle work, it was like coronavirus. Like if you have coronavirus, you're like not doing anything with it. So that's when I heard, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But I guess like if it's there,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, what are you
They
gonna
go
do?
through, yeah, they go through cycles of those things. Some years maybe they're going to have an outbreak, and then other years they do fine. So you just
Hmm.
never know.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. If there aren't, I'm gonna ask you another question too
Yep.
while I have them on mute. My question would be, I what was your like experience working for IDNR? And
Hmm.
I guess sometimes when I hear like governmental organizations, I'm like kind of like immediately like leery. Like I feel like I have a bias towards them. Like, oh, I don't know.
Sure.
You're so constrained and with like all the funding. So like I guess if you could talk about like your experience there or
Oh, yeah.
your experience like
Yeah.
getting to that position, just in general.
Yeah. I'll just give the whole rundown of when I started at school till now. So I got my undergrad at Franklin College. That's a small liberal arts school in Indiana. It's about 30 minutes south of Indianapolis. And they have a really great budding conservation biology program there. I originally went there, I was on the pre-vet track, and then I ended up switching. Um, so I got bit by the conservation bug and I was like, oh, I really want to do this. So I took all the classes and then I graduated. And coming out of Franklin, I was really burnt out. I did not want to go to graduate school, at least not right away. So I started my career with the state as a seasonal at one of our state parks called Fort Harrison State Park. So I was a seasonal naturalist there for 3 summers. And a naturalist is basically an outdoor teacher. You work with the public, you educate them on the natural resources, you get to play with wildlife and show them all the cool stuff. You do creek stomps, all that fun stuff, and you get to have a good time doing it. So I really enjoyed that, but I quickly found that I was not going to get a full-time job with just a bachelor's degree because it was so competitive. I was trying for naturalist jobs, and there was just anytime a full-time position would open up, they had internal shifting, and those positions just got filled, like without really ever going through any kind of process. So it was very difficult. So I was like, well, I've got to get something to make myself stand out. So after my first season, I started applying to graduate school, and that was 2013. And I did not get accepted into a program until 2016. I don't even know how many programs I applied to, how many people I talked to. It was terrible, terrible time for me. But I was working the whole time. I was still grinding. Got into graduate school, and I did my master's project on small mammals in a restored wetland system. And then I finished in 2018. Going back to graduate school after being out for 3 years was very hard. And I did not want to do a thesis. I just wanted to do the courses, but the course option was like not even an option for me. So I had to do the thesis because it was paid for. And I moved up to Fort Wayne, Indiana. I had never been there before, had to find housing, and just basically doubled my student loan debt to get this degree that I had to have to get a job. When I finished, or it was even before I finished, I was applying to full-time positions all over the place. I really wanted to stay in Indiana because all my family is here. Um, so that's what I was going for, but I was open to going to wherever. So I had maybe one or two interviews with the DNR, and then I didn't hear back. And then I finished, moved back home, and I had another seasonal naturalist job with a local parks department here where I live. And in the meantime, I was still applying. So I started to apply to the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. And I think I applied to 5 jobs and I got 5 interviews like right away. I was like, oh my gosh. So I finally got on with IDEM, and I was there for 2.5 years. That was my first state, like full-time state job, got my foot in the door. And it provided a level of stability in my life that I did not have before then, because I think I was on my last $10 before I got that seasonal position. I was so stressed out. It was just a hard time. And I started working at IDEM, learned about solid waste permitting. I learned about all the industry in the northwest part of the state because that was my service region. And I was still looking for a conservation job because I knew that IDEM was not where I was going to land for my whole career. So I kept doing conservation stuff in my personal time, and sometimes it would be during work time, so I would take PTO to go do those things. And then so finally jobs started opening up, and I was applying for them, and I started getting interviews, and I think I just wore them down. I just wore them down enough for them to say, we've got a job for you. So that's how I got into the aquatic health specialist. And now our health program has evolved since I took that. We added, because initially it was just 2 health biologists and our supervisor. We added a third one, and then we added that health biologist position. We added the waterfowl health specialist biologist, those 2 research ones. So the program's grown quite a bit. And then when our previous 1 health biologist left, they actually opened that up and allowed our supervisor to fill that. And so I did apply for that, and I got that position. And that happened just a couple of weeks ago. So that one is still work in progress. Going to learn about the Grand Calumet region and all those projects, all those organizations that do work up there. So I'm very much looking forward to it and kind of growing in my career.
Awesome. Thank you.
Congratulations on the new position.
Thanks.
Let's go to Laureen. Their hand's been raised patiently for a while.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, first of all, thank you for the presentation. And also, I have to say that I relate a lot to what you just said, like constantly going to job interviews and always
Mhm.
looking for jobs in conservation. It's very tiring, and I'm glad that you could make it in the end. But my question about this presentation was more into the subject of the public um, help that you get, because you were talking about the reports at the
Mhm.
beginning. So
Mhm.
it's kind of an example of how you can work with the public ends in hands. But do you have the opposite case, like they're trying to, maybe if they don't understand what you're doing, if they're trying to um, cause you some problems, let's say?
I have not had that happen with my reports, but I think that might happen more with the deer reports. Um, People in Indiana love deer. So sometimes, maybe you get people that are like, you're not doing enough for the deer. And so they know we have this reporting tool, and so they might submit a report thinking that they're gonna influence decisions that way. I think that happens with our deer program and like in conjunction with us. So I've not seen that happen with the aquatic reports, but I have heard of it with our deer. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if we need a skedaddle at 5 p.m., Maris, but we could probably have time for another question. Um, just going in order of questions asked, Kenna asked a question right after Lorraine. So we'll go with the chat. And she asked, what's the coolest slash most interesting case you've responded to? What sort of steps or tests did you do in figuring out what was going on in that case?
Um, I already talked about the coolest one and also the saddest one, which was the terrapin. But there was a weird one that I'll talk about that I did not mention was I think it was 2 years ago at this point. I got a report of someone had found a pig head in their driveway, and it like the meat was off of it, and they're like, I don't know how this got there. So I called them and I was like, is there pig farms near you? Do you have an enemy? Um, and then I reached out to IDEM and I said, are there any pig farms like anywhere close to this residence? And there were not. We don't have wild pigs in Indiana. I checked with the feds on that. Like there was no good reason that there should be a pig head. And I concluded that maybe this person has a disgruntled neighbor and they wanted to scare them. They did have cameras on their property, but unfortunately, the cameras were either not functioning or they just didn't catch how that pig head got there. So that was an interesting one and a little bit weird. Also, I was worried for that person that submitted that report to me, and I was like, you should follow up with your local sheriff's department and, make a report on it because this is strange.
It's like the mafia or something.
Yeah, yeah.
You have time for one final question. Danielle is interested in asking one.
All right, hey there. There goes my video. So I'm actually in Crown Point, Indiana, so it's not too far from you. So nice to see a chat here. I was curious, the algae that you mentioned in Shipshawana, do you know what species of that was?
I don't know. I don't know
Okay,
that they collected any either. I think IDEM deals more with identifying the algae and the
okay,
toxins that they emit into the water. Because I think they've got a web page on the algae, but I don't know that
okay,
anybody collected it and ID'd it.
okay. Curious. I used to work in Florida, so we had the brevetoxin and red tide quite a bit.
Mhm.
So I'm assuming they're different species. I was just curious if they were
Okay.
similar at all.
Okay.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank you, Lisa, one last time, and it's very generous of you to give us your contact information. So, if
Yep.
anyone in the chat or in the call has any more questions, feel free to reach out that way. So, I think that brings us to the end. So, thank you for joining us.
All right. Thanks everyone for having me. I appreciate it.
Right. Thank you so much.
Have a great evening, everyone.